Most people aren't irresponsible with money. In fact, a lot of people are doing the exact opposite. They pay their bills on time. They keep insurance. They follow the rules. They avoid risky decisions. They try to be careful, prepared, and reasonable. They do what they were told responsible adults are supposed to do. And yet, it still feels tight. It still feels fragile. It still feels like one unexpected expense could knock everything out of balance. That feeling isn't random. And it's not a personal failure. Because somewhere along the way, being responsible quietly became expensive. Not in a dramatic way. Not with one big decision. But slowly, piece by piece, month after month, charge after charge. Today, responsibility isn't just a behavior. It's a collection of recurring costs. Insurance premiums, fees, coverage plans, subscriptions, compliance costs, paperwork, protections. Things you don't buy to move forward, but things you buy just to avoid falling backward. And that's the part most people never had explained to them. We're taught that being responsible reduces risk. That if you plan ahead, follow the rules, and do things correctly, life becomes more stable, more predictable, safer. But for a lot of people today, the opposite is happening. The more responsible they become, the heavier their fixed costs get. Costs that don't care how your month went. Costs that don't pause when income fluctuates. Costs that don't disappear when things get tight. They just sit there. Every single month. Waiting. You don't feel stressed because you're bad with money. You feel stressed because your margin for error keeps shrinking. And responsibility, instead of creating breathing room, has become part of what eats that margin away. Think about it. Insurance used to be something you added once you were stable. Now it's something you need just to function. Health insurance, car insurance, renter's insurance, home insurance, liability coverage, protection plans, extended warranties. Each one individually makes sense. Each one feels reasonable. But together, they become a permanent layer of cost that never goes away. And opting out doesn't feel like a real option anymore. If you don't have coverage, you're exposed. If you don't comply, you're penalized. If you don't pay, you're excluded. Responsibility isn't framed as a choice. It's framed as a requirement. And requirements come with fees. The same thing happened with being by the book. Licenses, certifications, registrations, renewals, permits, background checks, credit checks, compliance rules. All things designed to create order and safety. All things that add friction and cost to everyday life. None of them feel dramatic. But together they change what responsibility actually means. Responsibility used to be about decisions. Now it's about maintenance. And maintenance is expensive because it never ends. What makes this especially difficult is that these costs are fixed, while income often isn't. Your paycheck can vary. Your hours can change. Your expenses can spike unexpectedly. But your responsible costs stay exactly the same. They don't care if you had a good month or a bad one. They don't care if you're tired, stressed, or stretched thin. They're due regardless. That's where the pressure comes from. It's not that people are spending wildly. It's that they're carrying a growing stack of non-negotiable expenses just to remain okay. Just to stay compliant. Just to stay protected. Just to avoid falling into a worse situation. And when something goes wrong, the stress hits harder, not because you failed, but because there's no slack left. No buffer. No room to absorb the hit. One problem doesn't just cost money. It collides with everything you're already maintaining. That's why so many people feel like they're doing everything right and still can't relax. That constant low-level anxiety isn't about greed or irresponsibility. It's about living inside a system where responsibility itself has a price tag attached to it. If this explanation already feels familiar, you're not imagining it. And if it helps put words to something you've been feeling but couldn't quite explain, consider liking the video and subscribing. This channel exists to explain money and systems calmly and honestly, without blaming individuals and without selling shortcuts. Now let's break down exactly how responsibility turned into a recurring bill, and why that shift changed how stable life feels for so many people. To understand why being responsible became expensive, we need to separate two ideas that used to mean the same thing but don't anymore: responsibility and security. They used to overlap. If you were responsible, you were more secure. You saved. You avoided unnecessary risk. You planned ahead. And in return, your life became more stable over time. What changed is not people's behavior. What changed is how the system prices security. Security used to be something you built. Now it's something you rent. Think about how many things in modern life are framed as protection. Insurance doesn't promise comfort. It promises damage control. Coverage doesn't make things better. It makes them less catastrophic. Compliance doesn't help you advance. It just keeps you allowed to participate. And every layer of protection comes with a recurring cost. Health insurance is the clearest example. You're not paying to be healthy. You're paying to avoid being financially destroyed if something goes wrong. Car insurance isn't about mobility. It's about liability. Renter's insurance isn't about your stuff. It's about not being wiped out by a single incident. None of these things improve your quality of life directly. They just reduce the downside. That's the first shift. Responsibility is no longer rewarded with upside. It's charged as downside prevention. The second shift is how these costs stack. Each responsible decision is rational on its own. No one insurance policy feels unreasonable. No single fee feels outrageous. No one compliance step feels excessive. But the system doesn't charge you once. It charges you everywhere. And because each charge lives in a different category, people rarely see the full picture. You don't think of insurance, licenses, subscriptions, fees, and compliance as one thing. But functionally, they all do the same job. They convert risk into a monthly payment. Over time, that turns life into a maintenance project. And maintenance has a very specific property. It never finishes. Once you add a responsible cost, you can't remove it without increasing risk. Canceling coverage doesn't feel like saving money. It feels like gambling. Letting something lapse doesn't feel freeing. It feels dangerous. So people keep everything, even when it stretches them thin. That's where the pressure compounds. Because while responsible costs are fixed, income is increasingly unstable. Hours fluctuate. Jobs change. Expenses spike. But insurance premiums don't care. Fees don't pause. Renewals don't adjust. They arrive the same way every month, regardless of what your life looks like. This mismatch is one of the biggest sources of modern financial stress. It's not that people can't budget. It's that budgeting assumes flexibility. And most responsible costs are non-negotiable. They don't scale down when things get tight. They don't offer relief for good behavior. They simply exist. Another quiet change is that responsibility is no longer optional in the way it once was. Opting out used to be a choice with trade-offs. Now it's framed as a violation. If you don't comply, you don't just accept risk. You face penalties, exclusion, or loss of access. No insurance can mean no service. No certification can mean no job. No compliance can mean fines, fees, or denial. Responsibility stopped being about judgment and started being about permission. And permission always has a cost. This creates a strange psychological effect. People feel like they're constantly paying just to remain in place. Not moving forward. Not improving. Just staying allowed. That's exhausting. Especially when you're told that doing everything right is supposed to feel reassuring. Instead, it feels like walking on a treadmill that never slows down. What makes this even harder to see is that these costs don't show up as dramatic failures. There's no crash. No collapse. Just gradual tightening. Less room to breathe. Less margin for error. Less ability to absorb surprises. That's why people often say things like, "I don't know where my money goes," even when they're careful. It's not disappearing. It's being allocated to invisible stability, to protection, to compliance, to things designed to prevent disaster, not create progress. And that leads to the final shift, which might be the most important one. Responsibility used to be a strategy for the future. Now it's a strategy for survival. People aren't asking, "How do I build something?" They're asking, "How do I avoid losing what I have?" That mindset isn't a personal flaw. It's a rational response to a system where the cost of mistakes has gone up and the buffer has gone down. When the margin disappears, every decision feels heavier. Every expense feels risky. Every surprise feels dangerous. Not because people are weak, but because the system priced responsibility in a way that leaves no slack. Understanding this doesn't mean rejecting responsibility. It means recognizing that the rules changed without anyone announcing it. And once you see that, the constant pressure makes sense. So let's step back and look at what we've really been talking about. This isn't a story about people becoming careless. It's a story about responsibility changing its role. Responsibility used to be something you practiced so that life would slowly become easier. You planned ahead, you avoided unnecessary risk, you made careful decisions, and over time that effort created stability. It gave you breathing room. It gave you confidence. It gave you a sense that you were building toward something. What changed is not the value of responsibility, but how the system charges for it. Today, responsibility is no longer just a set of behaviors. It's a collection of ongoing obligations. Insurance, compliance, fees, renewals, subscriptions, protections, coverage. All things designed to reduce risk, but all priced as permanent costs. And when permanent costs stack up, they don't feel like safety. They feel like pressure. That's why so many people feel stressed even when they're doing everything right. Not because they're failing, but because they're carrying a growing load of non-negotiable expenses that never rest. They're maintaining stability instead of building it. That distinction matters. Maintenance keeps things from falling apart, but it doesn't move you forward. And when most of your money goes toward maintenance, progress starts to feel out of reach, even if nothing is technically going wrong. This is also why so many people struggle to explain their stress. On paper, they're fine. They're insured. They're compliant. They're responsible. But emotionally, they're tense. Because they know how thin the margin really is. They know how quickly one unexpected event could collide with all the systems they're already maintaining. That tension isn't weakness. It's awareness. Understanding this doesn't mean rejecting responsibility or encouraging recklessness. Responsibility still matters. Protection still matters. Planning still matters. But it does mean seeing the system clearly, instead of turning that pressure inward and blaming yourself for feeling it. The system quietly shifted responsibility from a tool for growth into a cost of participation. And nobody really stopped to explain what that would feel like over time. So if you've ever wondered why being careful doesn't feel comforting anymore, why doing the right thing doesn't bring peace, or why life feels fragile even when you're prepared, this is part of the answer. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that responsibility itself was repackaged into a bill. And once you see that, the pressure stops feeling mysterious. It stops feeling personal. It starts to make sense. If this video helped you put words to something you've been carrying, thank you for spending your time here. These conversations aren't about fear or shortcuts. They're about understanding how money and systems actually work so you don't have to feel lost inside them. If you want more explanations like this, you can like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel, and it lets more people find content that explains these things calmly, without blame and without noise. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.